He almost quit on his dream, until one night at a stadium changed everything. What happened next will make you believe in comebacks again. The Etihad Stadium was roaring under the bright floodlights. Cold air swirled through the stands, carrying the chants of thousands of fans. Arman sat in the last row, his heart racing faster than the game itself. He had saved for months just to buy this ticket. To him, this was more than football. This was a reminder that dreams, no matter how far, could be reached. On the pitch, Manchester City pressed forward. Napoli stood firm, refusing to break. Every pass felt like a heartbeat. Every shot carried the weight of hope. Arman thought about his own struggles. His job felt meaningless. His goals felt distant. But watching these players fight for every inch reminded him of something. Life is not about avoiding struggle. It is about facing it head-on. The ball was whipped into the box. A powerful header thundered towards goal. The stadium erupted. Arman jumped to his feet, shouting with everyone else. For the first time in months, he felt alive. He felt that his own battle was not over. That maybe, just maybe, his turning point was near. And as Napoli lined up to respond, Arman whispered to himself that he was ready to fight too. The Etihad Stadium was roaring under the bright floodlights. Cold air swirled through the stands, carrying the chants of thousands of fans. Arman sat in the last row, his heart racing faster than the game itself. He had saved for months just to buy this ticket. To him, this was more than football. This was a reminder that dreams, no matter how far, could be reached. On the pitch, Manchester City pressed forward. Napoli stood firm, refusing to break. Every pass felt like a heartbeat. Every shot carried the weight of hope. Arman thought about his own struggles. His job felt meaningless. His goals felt distant. But watching these players fight for every inch reminded him of something. Life is not about avoiding struggle. It is about facing it head-on. The ball was whipped into the box. A powerful header thundered towards goal. The stadium erupted. Arman jumped to his feet, shouting with everyone else. For the first time in months, he felt alive. He felt that his own battle was not over. That maybe, just maybe, his turning point was near. And as Napoli lined up to respond, Arman whispered to himself that he was ready to fight too. The whistle blew and the first half ended. Fans rushed to grab snacks, but Arman stayed seated. His eyes remained fixed on the pitch, lost in thought. He remembered the day he almost quit his dream. He had once wanted to be a coach for local kids. He had started volunteering at a small club in his town. But after losing a few matches, parents complained. Sponsors pulled out. The team disbanded. And with it, Arman's confidence shattered. He stopped trying. He told himself that dreams were for lucky people. That he should stick to a regular job and forget everything else. But sitting there tonight, under the bright lights of one of the world's biggest stadiums, something inside him woke up. If these players could fight back after a goal, why could he not fight back after a failure? The second half began with fierce energy. Napoli came out attacking. Their forwards moved like lightning. The ball danced between them with perfect precision. Then it happened. Napoli scored. The away fans went wild. Arman felt his chest tighten. The match was level again. The atmosphere grew tense. Every fan in the stadium seemed to hold their breath. But the Manchester City players did not panic. They regrouped. They passed the ball calmly. They kept pushing forward with patience. It was as if they knew that setbacks are not the end. They are just part of the story. Arman felt goosebumps. He realized this was the lesson life had been trying to teach him all along. Setbacks are signals, not stop signs. Moments later, Manchester City attacked again. The winger sprinted down the left. He cut inside, beating one defender, then another. The ball curled beautifully into the far corner. Goal. The stadium exploded with noise. Arman shouted so loudly that his throat burned. His heart pounded like a drum. He felt tears in his eyes, but he did not care. Because this was no longer just a game. This was a message. You can fall behind, You can be challenged, but you can always come back stronger. The final whistle blew. Manchester City had won. Fans sang and clapped, waving their scarves proudly. But Arman did not move. He stood silently, letting the moment sink in. This was the night his life changed. He left the stadium slowly, walking past the glowing lights of Manchester. The cold air felt refreshing against his face. He felt awake. He felt new. That night in his small hotel room, he could not sleep. He replayed every goal in his mind, every cheer, every lesson, and then he picked up his phone. He opened a blank note, and he wrote 3 words. I will try. Those 3 words became his new beginning. The next morning, he returned home with a new fire in his heart. He went straight to the small football field in his neighborhood. The grass was uneven. The goalposts were rusty. But to Arman it was perfect. He called the kids who used to train with him. Some had grown taller. Some were shy, unsure if he was serious. But Arman smiled and told them that this time would be different. He started training them again. First, only a few showed up. But word spread quickly. Within weeks, more children came. Some brought their friends. Some brought their parents. Soon the field was full of laughter, energy, and hope. Arman poured his heart into every session. He taught them not just about football but about life. He told them that losing is not failure. That every defeat is a lesson. That strength is built in the moments when you feel weakest. Slowly the kids started winning matches. The parents who once complained began to cheer. The community began to support him again. Sponsors returned. New jerseys were bought. And with every small victory, Arman's confidence grew. He felt like he was living his purpose again. But deep inside, he knew there was still one more challenge waiting for him. A bigger tournament was coming. It was their chance to face the best teams in the region. Everyone looked at Arman for guidance. And for the first time he did not feel fear. He felt ready. The day of the big match arrived. The kids wore their new jerseys with pride. The stands were packed with families, neighbors, and friends. Arman stood at the sideline, his hands shaking slightly. He looked at the field and smiled. This was his Champions League moment. The whistle blew. The game began. The first half was tough. The opponents were strong. They scored first. The crowd went quiet. The kids' shoulders dropped. But Arman clapped loudly and shouted, "We are still in this." He reminded them of the nights they had trained in the rain. The mornings they had woken up early. The times they had refused to give up. The kids nodded. Their eyes lit up again. They went back on the pitch with fire in their hearts. Pass by pass they fought back. The equalizer came with 10 minutes to go. The crowd roared. Arman's heart pounded. One last attack could change everything. The ball was passed to the smallest player on the team. He ran faster than ever before. Defenders closed in. He lifted his head. And just as he was about to shoot, the ball was passed to the smallest player on the team. He ran faster than ever before. Defenders closed in. He lifted his head. And just as he was about to shoot, the ball flew off his foot like a rocket. Time seemed to freeze. The entire field held its breath. The goalkeeper dived. The ball curved, spinning past his fingertips. And it hit the back of the net. Goal. The field erupted. Parents screamed. Children jumped on their seats. The smallest player threw his arms in the air. His teammates ran to him, shouting in pure joy. Arman stood still for a moment. He felt his chest tighten. His eyes watered. Because he knew this was not just a goal. It was the moment everything had come full circle. The whistle blew. The match was over. They had won. The kids rushed to Arman and hugged him. He laughed. He cried. He could not stop smiling. He had started this journey alone, broken and doubtful. Now he stood as a leader, a teacher, and an inspiration. But the victory was not just about football. It was about proving that no dream is too small. That no failure is final. That no heart is too damaged to heal. When the celebration died down, Arman sat quietly near the empty goalpost. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and gold. He thought about the match he had seen in Manchester. The roar of the crowd. The fight back from behind. The moment when everything seemed lost but was won back with courage. That night had changed him forever. And now, he had passed that same lesson on to these children. He realized that life is just like football. You get knocked down. You lose possession. You fall behind. But as long as the game is still being played, you have a chance. And what matters most is not the score at halftime. It is how you finish. Arman stood up and looked at the kids, still laughing and celebrating. He knew this was only the beginning for them. Some of them would go far. Some of them would face obstacles even bigger than this game. But they would remember this day. They would remember the comeback. They would remember that when life pushes you down, you push back harder. Arman picked up a ball and placed it at the center of the field. He whispered to himself, "This is why I never gave up." Days turned into weeks. The team's reputation grew. They were invited to more tournaments. New kids joined. Parents volunteered. The little club became a symbol of hope for the whole neighborhood. And Arman became more than a coach. He became a mentor. He spoke at schools about resilience. He was invited to community events to inspire others. People asked him how he turned his life around. And he always told them the same thing. You have to keep playing until the final whistle. But deep inside, Arman still dreamed bigger. He wanted to build a proper training facility for the kids. A place with real grass, proper equipment, and a safe environment. He started saving money again. He worked extra shifts. He organized charity matches. People started donating. Local businesses supported him. Slowly the dream took shape. A year later, the field was transformed. Fresh green turf. New goalposts. Training cones, bibs and balls. Even a small clubhouse where kids could study after practice. On the opening day, the whole town came to watch. There were speeches, cheers and music. But Arman just stood quietly, looking at the field. This was his Champions League trophy. His heart swelled with pride. Because he had learned something that night in Manchester. And he had lived it every day since. That lesson was simple but powerful. Do not give up when you are losing. Do not give up when you are tired. Do not give up when no one believes in you. Because comebacks are real. And when you fight until the end, you can turn defeat into victory. Later that night, when the field was empty and quiet, Arman sat on the center circle. He looked up at the stars. He thought about the boy he used to be. Lost, doubtful, afraid. He thought about the man he had become. Strong, determined, unbreakable. And he smiled. Because he knew there would always be another match. Another challenge. Another battle. But he was no longer afraid. He was ready. And just as he stood up to leave, his phone buzzed. It was a message from one of his players. "Coach, thank you for believing in us." Arman stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed back, "You made me believe too." He put the phone away, picked up the ball and started walking home. The night was cool and calm. Somewhere far away, another stadium was roaring. Another match was being played. Another story was beginning. And Arman knew that somewhere, someone was sitting in the stands, feeling hopeless, feeling lost, waiting for their own spark. Waiting for their own comeback. He hoped they would find it. Because everyone deserves their chance to fight back. Everyone deserves their own winning goal. Everyone deserves to feel alive again. And as Arman disappeared into the quiet streets, one thing became clear. The real victory was not the match. It was the choice to keep playing. The choice to refuse surrender. The choice to believe that no matter the score, the game is not over until you decide it is. And that is the moment when life changes. The real victory was not the match. It was the choice to keep playing. The choice to refuse surrender. The choice to believe that no matter the score, the game is not over until you decide it is. And that is the moment when life changes. Arman walked home slowly that night. The streets were quiet. Streetlights cast golden shadows on the wet pavement. His footsteps echoed softly, each one matching the beat of his heart. He thought about the players he had trained, their smiling faces, their laughter after practice, the way they had hugged him after the final whistle. He thought about the smallest player scoring the winning goal, the look of pride in that child's eyes. And he thought about himself, the man he used to be, the man who almost quit. He felt grateful that he had not. But Arman knew that this was not the end. It was only one chapter. Life had many more challenges waiting. And he was ready to face them. The next morning, Arman woke up before sunrise. He brewed tea and sat by the window. The world outside was still sleeping. But inside him, a storm of determination was awake. He opened a notebook and wrote down his next goals. He wanted to start a youth academy. He wanted to offer free training for children who could not afford it. He wanted to give every child the chance to play, no matter their background. It was a big dream, bigger than anything he had tried before. But he had learned that big dreams are the ones worth chasing. He started making calls. He contacted old friends, coaches, and sports clubs. He reached out to former players he had trained years ago. He spoke with local businesses about sponsorships. Some people said yes. Some people said no. But Arman did not stop. He kept knocking on doors. He kept sharing his vision. Because he knew that every no only brought him closer to the next yes. Weeks passed. Some days were hard. Some nights he came home exhausted, wondering if he had taken on too much. But every time he felt like giving up, he remembered that night in Manchester. He remembered how Manchester City came back when the game looked lost. He remembered the roar of the crowd when the winning goal went in. He remembered how alive he felt. And he told himself, I am still in the game. Months later, Arman's dream started taking shape. A local council donated land for the youth academy. Volunteers helped clear the field. Parents offered to paint fences and build benches. The community came together, united by a shared dream. The first training session at the new academy was magical. Dozens of children showed up. Some had never played football before. Some played barefoot because they did not own shoes. But they all shared one thing: excitement. Arman gathered them in a circle. He looked at their eager faces. He told them a story about Manchester City versus Napoli. He described how the players never gave up, how they fought until the very end. And then he told the children this: life will try to stop you. It will knock you down. But if you keep going, if you refuse to quit, you will surprise yourself. You will win in ways you never imagined. The children listened quietly, hanging on every word. And then they played. They ran, they laughed, they chased the ball as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Arman stood on the sidelines, smiling. This was exactly what he had dreamed of. But life, as always, had more tests waiting. One rainy evening, a storm destroyed part of the field. The goals were knocked down. The clubhouse roof leaked. Some parents worried the academy would close. But Arman refused to let that happen. He gathered the children and told them, "This is just another match. And we are still playing." The next morning, he and the volunteers repaired the damage. The children helped too, carrying small buckets and tools. In just a few days, the academy was back in shape. And the children learned a powerful lesson: that when things break, you fix them. You do not walk away. You rebuild. The academy grew year after year. Arman started inviting professional coaches to train the children. Some scouts visited and spotted talented players. A few children were offered scholarships. One of them even got the chance to join a professional youth club. When Arman heard the news, he cried tears of joy. Because he knew this was only the beginning. His efforts were changing lives. One day, Arman was invited to speak at a national sports conference. He stood on stage in front of hundreds of coaches and athletes. He shared his story. He told them about failure, about pain, about almost giving up. He told them about the night in Manchester that had changed his life. And he told them about the children who had given him a reason to keep going. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then everyone stood and applauded. Arman realized something at that moment. He had become the kind of person he once needed. He had become proof that comebacks are real. That no matter how far you fall, you can rise again. Years passed. The academy became well known across the country. Children from distant towns came to train there. Some became players. Some became coaches. And some simply became stronger, more confident human beings. Arman watched proudly as they grew. And every time a match was played, every time a goal was scored, he felt that same spark that had started everything. The memory of Manchester City versus Napoli was still alive inside him. And one evening, long after training ended, Arman sat on the empty field. The sky was filled with stars. The grass was cool beneath his hands. He closed his eyes and smiled, because he knew the game was still going. And he was still playing. And somewhere out there, another person was sitting in a stadium, watching their own match, feeling that same fire ignite. And they too would begin their comeback. And they too would change their story. 'Cause that is what football teaches us. That is what life teaches us. No matter the score. No matter the challenge. The game is never over until you decide it is. And that is the moment you take control. That is the moment everything changes. The game is never over until you decide it is. And that is the moment you take control. That is the moment everything changes. But Arman's story did not end there. Years continued to pass. The academy thrived. Children grew into teenagers, teenagers into adults. Some of them left to chase bigger dreams. Some of them stayed to help teach the next generation. Arman watched proudly as his players became leaders. One of them, the smallest boy who had once scored the winning goal, became a coach at the academy. He gathered the children just like Arman once had. He told them about perseverance. He told them about courage. He told them about the day he had scored the goal that changed everything. Arman stood in the back, smiling. He had become a mentor to mentors, teacher of teachers. But life was not finished testing him. One winter, Arman fell sick. The doctors told him he needed surgery. It was risky. For a brief moment, fear returned. What if he could not return to the academy? What if everything he built fell apart? But then he remembered. He had faced fear before. And he had beaten it. So he went through with the surgery. The recovery was long. He could not visit the field for months. But the children kept training. The other coaches kept working. Parents stepped in to help. When Arman finally returned, he found the academy in perfect condition. Matches were still being played. The children were still smiling. The academy no longer depended only on him. It had grown strong enough to stand on its own. And that made Arman proud. Because true success is not about being needed forever. It is about building something that lasts even when you are gone. One evening, Arman sat with the coaches under the floodlights. The field was empty. They talked about the future. They planned to expand to nearby towns. They dreamed of starting girls' teams too. They wanted to make sure every child had a chance to play. Arman felt a deep sense of peace. Because he knew his life had meaning. He thought about that first night in Manchester again. The roar of the crowd. The electricity in the air. The moment he decided not to give up. And he realized something. That moment had not just changed his life. It had changed hundreds of lives. And maybe thousands more in the future. Because every child he trained would carry the lesson forward. Every one of them would face challenges. And they would remember that they had been taught to fight back. Arman's hair turned gray. Years rolled on. The academy became a famous youth center in the region. Players who once trained there were now professionals. Some of them sent messages of thanks. Some returned to visit, inspiring the new generation. Arman would sit quietly and watch the children play. Their laughter filled the air. The sound reminded him of a stadium full of cheering fans. And sometimes he would whisper to himself, "We are still in the game." One afternoon, a journalist came to interview him. She asked him what his proudest moment was. Arman smiled softly. He did not speak about trophies. He did not speak about victories. He spoke about the day the smallest boy scored the goal. He spoke about the night in Manchester that had sparked it all. He spoke about the countless days when he felt like quitting but chose not to. And then he said, "My proudest moment is every single time someone decides to keep going." The journalist nodded, deeply moved. The story was published across the country. People from far away wrote letters to Arman. They said his story inspired them to start again. Some started businesses. Some repaired broken relationships. Some simply chose to keep living when life felt unbearable. Arman read every letter. He kept them in a wooden box. Whenever he felt tired or discouraged, he opened the box and read them. They reminded him that one person's courage can create ripples that reach far beyond what they imagine. Years later, a documentary crew came to film the academy. They followed Arman through his daily routine. They filmed the children training, laughing, and competing. They filmed the parents cheering from the sidelines. When the documentary was released, it went viral. People around the world saw the story. Donations poured in. International clubs sent equipment. The academy grew bigger than Arman had ever dreamed. And one day, Arman was invited back to Manchester. Back to the Etihad Stadium. He stood there again under the same floodlights. The stands were full. The sound of chanting echoed in his chest. He closed his eyes and smiled. Because he knew this was where it had all begun. But this time he was not alone. He had brought his players with him. They were wide-eyed, amazed, inspired. For them, this was the night their own story might begin. As the teams walked out, Arman felt tears fill his eyes. He remembered the man who once sat alone in the stadium, feeling hopeless, feeling lost. And now he stood here as a leader, as proof that no setback is final, as living proof that the game is never over until you refuse to play. The match began. The crowd roared. Arman stood quietly, feeling every pass, every shot, every tackle. And somewhere deep inside, he knew this was more than football. This was life itself, played out on grass. This was a reminder that we are all players in our own game. And just as Manchester City had come back all those years ago, anyone can come back. Anyone can rise again. Arman smiled. Because he knew that even when the final whistle blows, the story is never really over. It continues in the next match, in the next challenge, in the next dream. And as long as there is breath in your lungs, as long as there is strength in your legs, you keep running. You keep fighting. You keep believing. Because life will give you the ball again. And when it does, you take your shot. You give it everything. You play as if the whole stadium is watching. Because somewhere, someone is waiting for you to score. Waiting for you to inspire them. Waiting for you to show them that comebacks are possible. And in that moment, you will realize what Arman realized. That the game is not just about winning. It is about becoming who you were meant to be. And that is the greatest victory of all. Years passed, and Arman's hair turned completely silver. He no longer ran across the field like he once did. But he was always there, standing at the touchline. His whistle hanging around his neck. The academy had become more than a training ground. It had become a home. Place where dreams were born. A place where children learned that courage is stronger than fear. One summer evening, the academy hosted its biggest tournament yet. Teams from different cities came to play. The stands were full. Flags waved. Music played. Arman watched from a small chair near the bench, smiling quietly. He saw children running freely, playing with joy, giving everything they had. And in their faces, he saw a reflection of himself. The man who once sat at the very top row of the Etihad Stadium, feeling small, feeling lost, but refusing to give up. When the final match ended, the children lifted the trophy. Cheers filled the air. But Arman's eyes were not on the trophy. They were on the players, laughing and hugging each other, living the moment with full hearts. Because that was the real prize. Not the silver cup, but the courage they had built, the confidence they now carried, the lesson they would take with them into life. As the sun set, painting the sky in orange and pink, Arman stood up slowly. He took one last look at the field. At the academy he had built from nothing. At the children whose lives were forever changed. And he felt at peace. He knew the game was no longer his to play. It belonged to them now. The next generation. They would carry it forward. They would face their own challenges. They would have their own comebacks. And one day, one of them would sit quietly under a stadium's bright lights, ready to begin again. Arman smiled. He placed the ball gently at the center of the field. And whispered, "The game is yours now." Then he turned and walked away as the night sky filled with stars. The children kept playing, their laughter echoing across the field. And somewhere far away, the Etihad Stadium roared once more. Because the story was complete. And yet it was just beginning.